And it was just really superb stuff all the way through. And so that was my obsession. Why it became interesting to deal with on the piano has to do with the way they write their songs, as opposed to a lot of pop albums, pop records that are, chords and melody, and the bigger the better. Radiohead appealed to me, to my counterpoint sensibilities, because it was as if each member of the band contributed a very particular kind of thread to each song. It wasn't like, John and Paul, wrote everything and everybody tagged along. Everybody contributed to every song. If you look at the publishing of Radiohead, every song is, it names every member of the band. And I think maybe only one or two of them actually read music, but they are all pitching in. So there was this sense of counterpoint that I liked, the idea of contributing threads contributing to the overall texture, that really appealed to me. So that in some of my arrangements, I swear, the only thing I needed to do was get out of the way and just write down what everybody was doing. And some of my more complex arrangements, like Let Down, which was a big song on OK Computer, literally wrote themselves. I mean, others took a little bit, and I also found that it wasn't really good enough to say, oh, well, here are the chords and here's the melody, because you couldn't get a sense of the fuzz pedal on the guitar, or the distortion of the guitar, or just the cymbals, the sizzling of the cymbals. You wanted to have a little bit more of that kind of viscera, the kinetic quality of the band. So I started working on these arrangements, and I think the simplest ones were more or less melody and harmony, but even something as simple and direct as exit music, I started doing my thing and adding more florid bass lines, because I'm left-handed. And so things came about in that way. And each song really was a matter of my having listened to it for 500 times, and then finding one way into the song, and then letting everything collect or accrue like rings of a tree to whatever that song was. So so every song was its own experience. I made every song harder than the last. So it's become, a massive group of material. I mean, I think I've done 36 Radiohead songs. I've done 2 complete Radiohead records. I've done a complete record of the songs of Elliott Smith, a record of Nick Drake, and then a potpourri that included Cocteau Twins and The Cure and Pink Floyd and Nirvana. I never thought I'd play a Nirvana song. How can you play grunge on the piano? But I actually found a way into Black heart-shaped box.
Mm. Chris,
And
I wanted to ask you, the work that you're talking about is actually well documented in the New York Times, and especially the CD with Matt Heimovitz, and uh, it's not typical for a concert pianist. Um, and you've had I think your first review in the Times with Donald Henahan in 1981. So
Mhm.
to all of a sudden be doing grunge rock, uh, this is this can be a little hard for the critics to handle, since that's in another room, you know. What,
Mhm.
how how did you experience that with the writers? And these are very prominent writers, of course, at the Times.
Well, most, the people who had, sort of like Gunther Schuller's taste in music, which was ruled by the Duke Ellington adage, there are only 2 kinds of music,
Right.
good kind and the other kind. And so it's really up to the audience to react and respond to the music that moves them, and it's up to the performers to perform what they believe in. So I just want to go back for a second, because the heart-shaped box was a very particular kind of thing. I was listening to a lot of Messiaen, and I was and Scriabin, and so I thought, Wouldn't it be great if we could find a way to make those kinds of colored chords, those stained glass chords like in Messiaen, but do it in such a way to honor the grunge aesthetic so that it would be like a dysfunctional 4-year-old with a box of 64 crayons, and they would just make this black space out of a piece of paper. And I thought that was a good grunge mentality, but it would be a blackness that would be filled with all of these different colors. And so I made many Scriabin-esque type chords and many Messiaen kind of chords. And the funny part was I premiered it down in Texas on a From the Top show. And I remember reading about a young pianist who was also on the show and made a very firm point of saying that he never listened to anything else other than classical music. He was homeschooled on a farm, I think, 2 hours outside of San Antonio, never listened to anything else, wasn't interested in any other kind of music, just nothing. So I was playing Heart-Shaped Box and he was backstage ready to come on. And he turned to our producer at the time and he said, I want to play that.
Well,
So
Chris, I get it.
brought him to the dark side. But
Yeah,
as far as writers go, unless you're Alan Kozin, you don't know how to write about it because
right,
he's the only one. He's the only one who, I mean, Hanahan used to make a pretense of that, but
right,
no, Alan, is the ultimate in terms of
right.
having a balanced, comprehensive view of all musics.
Our friend, I believe Carol Fink is with us from Florida, an old colleague, friend, rather than old, I should say timeless, uh, educator and pianist in the DC area. And also, I'm pleased to see that Ken Lowenberg is with us as well. I don't know so many people, but also, just one second, let me make our good friend Sally Beth Bunbury from the Decor Bacon Diplomatic Corps Institution. I'm sure there are more. Then, of course, Polly Rearson. Now, Carol, you know Polly, right? Yeah, so Polly is with us. And by the way, Carol, Polly and her husband and her family have been very, very close friends of ours over the years. And if I'm not mistaken, it's because of you. So I'm glad we could bring that together. But Chris,
I've got a
I
couple of
got a
friends in the
note
house too. I
from,
see my friend Sally is here and my friend Jack Regan is here.
oh, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
So I got a note from Peggy Otwell, who is known as Margaret Otwell in the music world. She ran a series actually in the 80s with National Symphony People, a chamber music series. And and then she was teaching at George Mason, and then she left to go to Hal Leonard, and she became the director of educational publications. And she sent this deeply emotional, I keep forgetting to send it to you, a deeply emotional response to the e-blast that she received about how she'd heard you play Radiohead, and it just touched her so much. I gotta send it to you. And I didn't, she wasn't the only one that responded in that way. And I just find again, back to the critics who, as you would say, not all of them were able to handle it, but there's an audience out there that is ready and willing and eager to cross over from Petrushka to Radiohead and Blonde Redhead. Speaking of Blonde Redhead, I am a big fan of Blonde Redhead, which many people here may not know. I mean, you may not know that group, but years ago, I think in 2009, when I saw that you were doing Radiohead, I dropped you a note, and I know you did Blonde Redhead, but were you already doing
Yeah.
that, or did I inspire you?
No, I had great teachers and guides in popular music since the days I was living in New York in the late '80s and early '90s. So yeah, I got all my taste from them. I'm afraid, Burnett, but the sentiment is appreciated. And Matt, so yeah, Matt and I did two songs by Blonde Redhead.
Yeah, Butterfly, right?
Butterfly, yeah.
Um,
Misery is a Butterfly, and the other
Misery's
one
a
was
Butterfly. I saw them at in concert, and I chatted a bit with the guitarist, whose name fails me at the moment. Um, and I was saying that I was actually playing their tunes on making arrangements on the piano, and I was saying, I'd really enjoy making a collection and publishing it. Um, and of course, that was one of a million amazing ideas I've had that I never got around to doing. He was he was flattered, but that was the end of that conversation. So you're on the concert, which I want to remind everybody here that that's what we're really focused on, is your concert at the Kennedy Center, and be sure and look at the link in the chat room. Uh, um, it's November 6th, where you're going to be doing music of Radiohead and J.S. Bach. And I'm confident, Chris, that nobody else is doing this. And it's gotten a lot of attention um, from the classical crowd, by the way. Oh, Radiohead. Yeah, I got to go see that. So maybe you could comment on that.
Well, a lot of folks, well, people have taken to it. I mean, for instance, my arrangement of exit music for a film, one of my earliest arrangements, is actually part of the curriculum at the Royal Conservatory in Toronto, and has been for several years. So any day you can go up on YouTube and find any number of people playing my arrangements, among them Royal Conservatory students. And I did self-publish a collection of them. I now just sell them as PDFs, but there was a book by me and Steve Byram. Steve Byram did the cover art for, I think, most of my early arrangements records. True Love Waits. He used to work for Sony, Steve Byram, and then the records on World Village, the second Radiohead record, the Elliott Smith record and the Nick Drake record. All of those were artwork by Steve. And so we made this coffee table book, and he had to go to Padelson's to figure out how the binding was going to work so that you could actually have it lying open flat on the keyboard. And he actually had some good questions, like, do you actually read across the 2 pages from left to right? Or do you just do 1 page at a time? I said, it's 1 page at a time. Good question, though. And so he illustrated every page that didn't have music on it, had a major illustration by Steve Byram. And even those that just had music on them would be texturized or visually arresting, to the point where it reminded me of the old John Thompson books, because you'd be looking at the Happy Farmer, and there you'd see the guy with the rake, and it was nice being able to look at the notes and look at a little picture and get a little bit of the narrative. So it was an amazing book. I think you can probably, I don't even have any more copies of it, but I think you can still get one on eBay for $500 or something like that. But yeah, it was great being able to publish them all in the same place, except for the one thing, and this is the reason that got me into playing from the score, was because I would be playing an arrangement, but every time I played the arrangement, I would be improving it in some way or another. And so I was collaborating with the jazz pianist Fred Hirsch at the time, and playing some of his music, and we would play some 2 piano stuff. And of course, he was playing everything from memory because he was improvising, But I said, I wish I could improvise the Radiohead stuff, but I'm always, like the next song is affecting the way I think of the song before, and so I'm constantly revising. And he said, "Welcome to composer hell." So that was his.
Chris, let's stop with Fred. And did you know him he was at school when we were there, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And speaking of silos, I know Gunther wanted everybody to have a love fest. Gunther Schuller was the president at that time, and a force that we're going to talk about in a later session. But there was the jazz scene, and there was the contemporary. What did they call it? Third stream scene.
Third stream, yeah.
And then there were the classical people, and never shall they meet. That's really what went on there. But I'd be interested. A buddy of mine in Beijing, of all places, a very fine Italian pianist. Long story, but he trained as both a classical and jazz pianist. So he goes to New York for the month of February during college break in Beijing, and also in the summer. And he was going around to different jazz teachers and coaches, and finally concluded that Fred, not to be unfair to everybody else, Fred was really the man.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and he said Fred only all they did was look at Bach chorales and the voicings. He would spend the whole hour dissecting Bach chorales.
Yeah, Fred's amazing. I was introduced to Ethan Iverson also,
Oh yeah,
basically through
right,
our connection with Fred at
right.
NEC. Ethan
Oh, Ethan
studied
was at NEC also?
no Ethan, but Ethan studied with Fred after we had all
Oh,
left
I
school,
see.
and now Ethan's teaching at NEC.
Right, right. Yeah, he's become a giant. But tell us more about uh, chatting with Fred about this stuff and kind of the ingredients that Fred was seeing.
Well,
This
it
is
was
Fred
just it was
Hirsch,
just it was
by the
just
way.
my take that it was impossible to memorize this stuff because I was thinking too much about how I was going to change things. And actually, in a certain way, my reluctance to play from memory the Bach has to do with sort of the new and interesting and different way that I'm looking at Bach. Because if one is memorizing, all of Bach's wonderful note choices, that's a great thing. But if you're concentrating on actual independence of voices and serendipitous exchanges and trying to do things like, for instance, I've done a lot of work recently on virtual historical instruments. I have several dozens of fortepianos, concert grands, harpsichords, clavichords through my TEQ, Piano Tech system that I run on my Casio. And so when I was immersed initially with the well-tempered clavier and got into this panoply, this library of possible sounds, the idea behind it was to address the 300th, the tricentennial of the well-tempered clavier, Book One, with 300 years of keyboard evolution, and so that got me into assigning each work, each prelude and fugue to a different instrument, but more importantly, it really had me not doing things anecdotally, but just saying how would Bach play this on the harpsichord? There you have a harpsichord, so do it that way. So coming up with things like, for instance, just the C major prelude. Da da dee da da dee. Why is that? What can we do with that echo? It's obviously an echo, and you can do that on the piano. And I chose to do it a little bit on the piano. But what would Bach have done on that? And so the idea of da da dee da dee. The other thing about an echo is that it's slightly slower than the original one. So that you can do on a harpsichord. So that was number one change that I made. And then the second question that I asked was, how do we make the first two quarters sound different from the quarters identical text in the third and fourth beat? So that made it possible for me to treat that echo differently. So in other words, connected, slightly more detached, and then to create an upbeat feel, a second beat feel, so doing the opposite, so we could actually make a connection to the next bar. So all of these things I felt were really part and parcel of Bach's clues along the way. The man hardly ever wrote any dynamic marks, but at the same time, I came to feel that he was giving us many, many different clues as to how to address the material in every given moment. For instance, in those moments that, we have a little cadential movement, that sounds to us like a slight syncopation. But what Bach was doing, I mean, he could have very easily just done dee da dee. But if you stagger it that way and make that slight syncopation, I believe that is Bach's way of saying we need to pull on the reins a little, dee da dee da. That it needs to be that not jazzy syncopation, but a syncopation of tenuto.
Mm.
Similarly, when the going gets tough, the tough should not get going. The tough should dig in. And so there are all those many places throughout the preludes and the fugues where there are sudden cruxes of harmonic drama. And I believe that we really have to take my own best advice from the top and really leave the time for that to happen. For instance, if I was playing a Wieniawski piece with one of my young guests, and we'd work up a good head of steam, and then they'd be off and running in the cadenza, right? And they continue the cadenza as though the orchestra was still behind them, like chasing them down the street or something. But invariably there would be octaves and leaps and bounds and all kinds of things. But the how do we affect that? How do we make that work? And I said the moments when the composer says the orchestra has been stripped away, you are now the momentary master or mistress of time and space. This is the composer's way of saying it is all in your hands in this moment. And so when you want to make those octave leaps, make them in the time that it will take to make them sound well. And it's usually just a split second here or there, but that's particularly why all of the performances you heard on From the Top were because I gave everyone absolute license in those moments. So I decided to take my own best advice, and I did a performance of Beethoven Third Concerto down in Roanoke. And so I would not just relegate my freedom of expression to the cadenza. There were several places throughout the concerto, and we're talking about a composer of the most kinetic and visceral, momentum-based music. I would still find a couple of measures here and there where I was playing unaccompanied. And so again, I decided that was Beethoven's cue, that I should really take this in hand and make it. I mean, you don't have to do a Pokerellich, pulling it all, apart, but to really make people realize, yes, something is happening here. We are being focused on this moment of the solo piano part. And so there's going to be a little bit of give and take. I mean, my least favorite marking in all of music is espressivo, because it's like you're playing along, and then he marks espressivo. Like, what does that mean? Like I've been a cold fish all this time. Now you say espressivo. What a thing to say! What a discouraging thing to say. But I realized that espressivo was really the solo piano marking that we would see in a vocal piece, or even in the Rachmaninoff cello sonata, colla parte. So the colla parte is the singer's going to get up to some stuff in here, so pay attention.
Chris, I'm going to drag you back to Fred Hirsch.
Don't.
Don't.
Not interested.
All right.
Can
I drag you back to Radiohead? I want to go further in the Bach, but
I'm almost there. I'm almost there.
Yeah.
So the thing that I was trying to bring from this Beethoven concerto event and the Wieniawski situation, giving the freedom to the kids, I decided to take one step further and say, well, if we're playing solo piano music of any sort, who are we being chased by? We are the constant master of space and time. And so this is what led me to have a rather free way with Bach. So, and I do it with Radiohead as well. The final takes that we were considering for True Love Waits, my first Sony record of Radiohead stuff, I found that there were some takes that were very much concentrated on the beat, as rock music might as well be. But there are other takes that were much more concentrated on making the melody sing its best. And it was only a shading here and there, but I've come ever since then to bring the same kind of solo sensibility and master of time and space into those pop-oriented, magnificently metronomic rock pieces.
Chris, you have some. I've listened to a couple of programs where you did Ondine from Gaspar. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, my obvious question is, do you see things in Ondine that you're also trying to bring to Radiohead? And I'll just mention to those here who don't know that Ravel wrote this piece in 1905, and it's every it has so many colors and beautiful harmonies and shifts of harmonies. It's incredibly powerful work of music. There are actually three movements in Gaspard de la Nuit, but the first movement is 9 minutes long, and is almost an epic in itself. But let's talk about the colors and the shifting harmonies, the
Exactly. Yeah.
parallel harmonies. Of
Mhm.
course, he always likes to have a minor second dissonance anywhere, somewhere in the chord, and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, Undine was a seminal work for me because I was just getting started. I was originally studying at NEC with Beatrice Erdely, who was also, as Russell Sherman was, a student of Edward Steuermann. And all my best friends were Russell Sherman students. And I then came to study with Russell. But at that very moment, Cynthia Darby was a very, very good friend, and she
Hmm.
was playing Ondine, and she was playing Gaspar. And I
Hmm.
just remember listening to her and feeling like the piano had just become this enormous color box. And I was not conscious of attack or decay or anything like that. It was a Pandora's box of possibility. And so that in itself was something that I've always strived to create in every piece of music that I play. It's an orchestral sensibility, I might say, but essentially, you know, Ondine was sort of the template for the kind of textures that I put into the Radiohead stuff. Because again, you don't want it to be monolithic. You want it to be contrapuntal, and you also want it to be orchestral in terms of the different textures, the different motives that we have to draw on that come together to make a unique texture. I mean, that's why my Radiohead pieces. I mean, there is a common sensibility, but you couldn't say that. Oh yeah, he just did the same thing 36 times. No, every piece is designed around the elements that are there, and to also bring them out in the way that we possibly can.
Hmm. So, are you still? Do you still keep Gaspar in your hands?
I haven't lately. I'd be very interested in how I would play it now, post my Bach immersion.
Right.
I know the Bach has really affected everything that I think about music, and that's how I came to it. But yeah, that's really been the main mover of the last couple of years.
I want to bring up Friedrich Gulda, if you don't mind. I don't know if you ever met him. He arguably the most important Viennese pianist of the late 20th century. He and Brendel, I guess, but he was certainly an iconoclast. Just a refresher, he won the Geneva competition when he was 15 in 1945, and then already by 1955 he did the album uh, Friedrich Gulda Live at Birdland with all these bebop-based tunes that he wrote, and he had Phil Woods and some of Phil Woods' colleagues as a band. It was septet, and he was an incredible jazz pianist. Well, fast forward to the Concerthaus, and by the late '60s, when he would play the late Beethoven sonatas in a concert. And by the way, he recorded all 32 3 times, and he did the complete well-tempered clavier as well. I heard part of that when I was a student in Indiana, part of the well-tempered clavier. Uh, but I just wanted to give an idea of the scope of his work. But the Concerthaus and other venues in Europe did not like what he was doing. He would do Light My Fire, his arrangement of Light My Fire as an encore, or he would do one of his bebop tunes as an encore, and this was entirely unacceptable, and they'd stop booking him. They would require that he send his complete program, include, which you have to do anyway, complete program, including the encores, and you will not diverge from any of this. So I bring that up because these were slightly different times, but maybe not. Uh,
Well, actually, I've had the opposite problem. I was playing in Jackson Hole And I even met some of my Radiohead fans before the show. But unfortunately for them, and much to their displeasure, I was playing Radiohead on the second half, and I was playing the Liszt arrangement of the Berlioz Symphony Fantastique on the first half. And
Wow.
they were just not having it. They really were just not having it, which was too bad.
So it's a question of timing.
It's a question of taste. It's a question of personal taste, which is why I think we need to go back to the Gunther Ellington adage, which is there are two kinds of music, good and bad, and it really is up to us to play what we believe in. And if we believe in something, then the people, and it's up to the audience to have an open mind. I mean, so there are some people who will never listen to my Radiohead stuff and actually hold it very much against me that I do it at all. It's a betrayal as far as they're concerned. But then there are other people. I played the Chopin Andante Spianato and Polonaise and the Liberace, the Michael Daugherty Tombo Liberace with the Orange County Symphony, and I played Airbag for an encore and a Radiohead song.
Hmm.
And I had a friend who was coming backstage, and she was waiting at the elevator with a little blue-haired, bun-haired lady who had obviously never heard that before. And what is she doing? She's whistling Airbag at the elevator. So we make our conversions as we may, but it's only the people who are willing to make that leap.
So, Chris, do you feel we're going to do another session on education? By the way, everybody, we are intending to. This will be a series. We want to talk about immigrants and education, and I'll tell you why. Because many of these 14-year-olds that were ready for professional careers that Chris worked with over the decades were children of immigrants or themselves immigrants. And so we'll talk about that, and also we're going to talk about New England Conservatory, and very especially about Gunther Schuller, who was really a visionary in every sense of the word. And then we want to do. By the way, I want to do a session, Chris. We didn't talk about this specifically about your not arrangements, but your electronic Renaissance and Baroque instruments that you're using for Bach as you dig into Bach. Um,
I'm actually going to do all of book one in my version, as I call it, the virtually tempered clavier. I'm playing that July 20th at as part of the Stretto Festival
this is
at
at Baruch, right?
at Baruch College,
I,
July 20th. Yeah.
I'm going to try it. It comes at a bad time. Can you make it August 1st? That's we're supposed to be. I'm working on my tan lines on
There
that,
you go. Come on. Yeah. Priorities. Yeah.
and yeah, I don't know. Have to weigh this. I was headed somewhere with these other things, but
But you were talking about the experimental
the
with the
kid. Okay, let's go back to the kids. Now,
yeah.
you can't escape the fact that you're working with teenagers and you're playing Radiohead. So you did have an audience that I'm sure they must have been influenced by this. I mean, you already had in the 80s, Kronos was playing Purple Haze,
Right.
which somehow it took a long time for other string quartets. Now everybody's doing that, but
Right.
uh,
Well, actually, the kids on the show had their own passions, and we encouraged them. I mean, we would always talk about what other musics that they listened to, and quite a lot of them did their own arranging of video game music, or
right.
or sound scores, film scores and things like that. So now we have all of those going gangbusters, and so they all had their passions, and that was always, somebody told me, that they had an opera aria that they wanted me to arrange for them. I said, well, why don't you do it? I mean, you're the one who's passionate about it, and you're going to be the one that's going to come up with the best solutions. I always feel that, I mean, at the very least, we should allow the shape of our hands to dictate how we absorb and then resynthesize the music that we love. And I don't think there's anybody that can do that better than oneself.
Now, did you ever talk to Gunther about kind of the breadth of what you were doing?
Actually, Gunther turned me on to who was it? Who was it that he thought of as the British Scriabin? I'm not going to come up with the name,
I don't
but
know.
but he said anybody in the chat, the British Scriabin. Um, this was and I've probably got a couple of them in my iPad, but I'm not. I'll hope one of our genius friends knows what I talk about. But Gunther said absolutely that my Radiohead stuff completely reminded him of this fellow, and I actually looked at a bunch of his music and loved the Scriabinesque sense of harmony, and there was also a textural component to that. So yeah, Gunther was a fan. Gunther, I got to say, Gunther was really. I mean, if you take into account my years with Beatrice Erdely and my years with Russell Sherman, Gunther was the connective tissue. I was with Gunther. He was my mentor for the whole time at New England Conservatory and well beyond. We were at Tanglewood together, all that stuff. Yeah. So he was really a major influence. And so of course it meant a great deal to me that he liked my stuff there in that realm. I wasn't doing a busman's holiday, I was in earnest. And he was also a big fan of From the Top, to the point where we actually did a whole show with Gunther of all of his favorite groups that had been on the show, the Bone Rangers, for instance. And he was very, very enthusiastic about arcades.
Wow. Hey, what an incredible guy. I saw him. Oh, I played, that he founded with David Baker, the Smithsonian Jazz Masterworks Orchestra.
Yeah.
And I was invited to play with them music of Benny Moten. And so
Mhm.
uh, he was sitting there while he's talking to me. He has a Discman. This is in the mid 90s. He has a Discman and he has earphones on and he's transcribing some 30s recording while he's talking
Yes.
to me. He's transcribing the Barry sax part, you know?
Yeah.
And my charts were transcribed by Dick, the piano charts were transcribed by him and by Dick Hyman. These were ferocious stride charts because Benny Moten's pianist was Count Basie. Very few people know that Count Basie was a killer stride piano player in his early career. But I was going somewhere with that, and I completely forgot. I got distracted by the breadth of Gunther, but he was
Yeah.
definitely one of a kind, and he I don't know what fill in the blanks, Chris.
I'm actually just looking to see if I can come up with the name of that composer.
Oh,
No, and I can't.
The British
The
Scriabin.
British Scriabin. I'm not coming up with it. I obviously didn't take any music enough to heart to have it in my iPad. I'm sorry to
Right.
say.
Chris, I'm going to ask you a question that I ask everybody, and it has to do with the title of this series, Arts Up Next. There's a curator uh, who's based all over Europe and presents at the Venice Biennale, and he has a gallery called the Serpentine in London. But he also presents people at uh, in New York or in Geneva, wherever. He's all over the place. Um, and he had publishes his interviews with artists like Louise Bourgeois or Frank Gehry, um, David Hockney, sorry. And he always asks them at the end of the interview, what's not working
Right.
in your work? And of course, in his case, he sees that as a chance to try to get involved at what's not working so he can make it work and present it somewhere. So I'm curious what things that you're in your dreams that still haven't come together the way you want them or that you're about to accomplish and things like that.
Well, actually, my work with Bach, and I've actually come up with concurrently with my immersion and my recording the Well Tempered Complete for a long time. Um, I was also coming up with a series of video musings and meditations on each one of the 96 preludes and fugues of the Well-Tempered Clavier. And I called that, it was a 40 plus hours of video. And I called that Everything We Need to Know About Playing the Piano We Learned from the Well-Tempered Clavier. And it's a cumbersome title, but it's actually true, because I actually came up with a method for how to approach Bach, and then by association and extrapolation, every piece, every type of music that we can address. So I just taught Les Adieux Sonata the other day, and all of the ideas, all of the concepts that I had in mind were those that I figured out from my work with the Well-Tempered Clavier. So to my mind, I think I do have it figured out now. I mean, as far as how to play the piano. I'm sorry it's taken me this long, but I'm quite confident that yeah, I know what I'm doing and I love what I'm doing.
Well, back to Goulda, he was very worshipful about Dr. Monson has declared that would be Cyril Scott.
Cyril Scott, thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Linda. Cyril Scott, that's exactly who it is.
Yeah, Goulda was very worshipful about Mozart, Bach, Beethoven. He treated them as basically as gods, and in every respect that he worshipped. He knew their music intimately, and yeah, I wonder, and I know that in musicians we have a spiritual connection to the music that people outside the music world actually have no idea that we have that.
I actually want to make one more point about that connection with the music, and you're mentioning Mozart reminded me, because we in particular in Mozart we're very much enamored of even scale passages, et cetera. But a friend of mine, a St. Petersburg friend, who's been just retired at the University of Texas at Austin, Sophia Gilmson, tells me that one of the mainstays of Russian piano pedagogy is the idea of intonation. And it's not whether the piano is out of tune or not. It has to do with the addressing of each interval. And so if you have an upward whole step, that's a very forthright thing. If you have a half step, that's a little bit more insidious and insinuative. And so if you really think, and of course, dealing with the leap of a third or a fourth or a sixth or an octave or a seventh, these have their own way of physically manifesting themselves in terms of intonation. And this is why when we listen to Richter and we listen to Gilels, there's an intelligence about their playing that is absent in so many others. And it is because of this Russian pedagogical concept of intonation. So it gets to the point where you're playing your scales and you're making them even, but are you really addressing the intonation of one half step to another or a whole step to another? And that's where I believe we tend to fall flat. And particularly in terms of Mozart, we have to really think of them vocally, lyrically. And that sense of intonation has to be visceral to our experience of playing this music on the piano. We really have to make that intelligence happen, and it happens through intonation.
So I guess on steroids would be the D minor fugue in the second book, the chromatic falling, and then the B minor prelude in the first book.
I usually eschew the chromaticism. I find the chromaticism to be a superstructure, not a feature, because I find if we
eschew the chromaticism.
Yeah, well, in other words, I know that the best part about that D minor fugue is not that chromatic thing, but is actually the counter subject that finally comes in. Thank God. And in the B minor doesn't have that kind of. My problem with the chromaticism is I don't want it to sound like how dry I am. I know it doesn't. We don't want it to sound like a barbershop quartet. Much of the time, Bach is using chromaticism as a substructure, as a subtext. And so if we actually pay attention to more what is on top of that chromatic thing, you're always better off and you're always having much more fun.
Well, we got 3 more minutes. I want you to differentiate between what you're talking about with Deleuze and Richter and then the chromaticism of Bach.
Well, it's not the intonation isn't about chromaticism. It's just about creating an integral half step, something that, like on the violin, the half step would be closer. And so to execute on that on the piano, you may be overholding a little bit to make that real connection. Whereas a whole step would be, would be discrete and integral. But so it's that insinuating sense of the half step versus the whole step that is really the crux of that intonational equation.
Chris, we're going to wrap it up.
We don't have time for questions.
Pardon?
We don't have time for questions.
Oh, how could I be so stupid? Yeah, let's have some questions. So far we have none, so fire
Okay.
away.
Yeah. I mean, you asked the main one, why Radiohead? I hope we adequately answered that question.
You brought up so many other things. Let's see if we get any questions in the chat room here. While we're waiting for those, I will summarize again. Chris is performing at the Kennedy Center Terrace Theater, music of Radiohead and J.S. Bach on November 6th. Carol, think this is a good time for you to fly up to National. It's 5 minutes by Uber from National to the Kennedy Center. Go to the
That's
concert.
right. Oh, and hey, we've got November 6th, but you know what else we've got on November 3rd, Burnett?
Oh, of course. Yeah, talk about that at George Mason
A
University.
masterclass with Dr. Linda Monson at George Mason University. And we will be doing the masterclass on a very special instrument. It was Alicia De La Rocha's favorite instrument in New York, and it lived with me. It was my concert grand, who I named Ariel, and I was honored to sell Ariel recently. Linda came and played a wonderful bunch of Spanish music. Another great Alicia De La Rocha fan. So it's such an amazing honor to have this Alicia De La Rocha favorite piano be now the concert instrument or one of the concert instruments at George Mason University. Thanks to Dr. Linda Monson's enthusiasm for the instrument. I'm glad that's working out. And I'm thrilled. I don't know if I'll be able to hold the tears back doing a masterclass on my old piano, but it's such a magnificent honor to do that. And thank you, Burnett, and thank you, Linda, for putting that together.
Linda, can we invite the public to the masterclass? Because if so, we'll talk about that and we'll make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let's see. We didn't see. Nobody is in an inquisitive mood apparently, Chris.
Or they're too horrified by all that I've said, so
they just are astonished and in a state of shock.
Right.
But just a reminder, we'll be announcing 2 or 3 more of these. One focused on some of the luminaries at New England Conservatory, most notably Gunther Schuller, but also Ben Zander and Russell Sherman. And then also, we do need to do something about Bach on your instruments, Chris, because this is really what you're focused on now. And then we'll look at immigration, the immigrants in this country and children of immigrants, and why they are an oversized population among the more extraordinary talents in this country. So, Chris, thank you so much for taking your time. I know this is very exciting for everybody to be a part of this project, and there's much more to come,
Well,
And
thank you, Burnett, for having me and putting this together so beautifully. And I look
yeah,
forward to our
well,
conversation.
it's an honor for me, Chris, and it ties a lot of things together. You know, we met when you were 19 and I was 22 or something like that at New England. But then also I was your page turner. Let's not forget that.
That's
Uh,
right.
I was never
That's
paid for that gig, by the way. About 15 years ago, Chris was playing with Carter Bray, the New York Phil principal, when Mizell was conductor. It was at Castleton, and Lauren Mizell would bring the players down there to play. It was, you know, they just had a great time there. The symphony players. Well, many of those were the good old days for
You
some.
bet.
Anyway, it's good to connect again. And by the way, Chris is going to be in DC for several days, and we're our plan is to make a lot of very interesting things happen during that time. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Goodbye,
everybody.
and we'll all meet again before long. Thanks. A very auspicious crowd we have here. Thank you, and see you before long.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.